one of 4 ways today and tomorrow. The first way is by factoring. That's probably the way you're most familiar with, probably the easiest way for you if you're good with numbers. So if it is factorable, we factor it out. This would factor to x minus 3, x plus 2, x would equal 3, or negative 2. Extracting the square root. If there is a square around the parentheses, all you have to do is take the square root of both sides. Square root of 16 is plus or minus 4. Remember, when you take the square root, you have 2 possible answers. From there, you get x plus 3 equals plus or minus 4, and then you would subtract 3 from the other side. You would get negative 7, or you would get positive 1. You get negative 7 or positive 1. Completing the square is when something is not factorable. We can move the constant to the other side. So x squared plus 6x equals 5. I put a blank on both of these sides, and I say, what is half of 6? It is 3, and I square 3, and I get 9. You add 9 into both of those segments, and you have, if I break this down, it would be x plus 3 squared equals 14. Take the square root of both sides, you get x plus 3 equals plus or minus radical 14, and then your solution is x equals negative 3 plus or minus radical 14. And then the other one is quadratic function, meaning what?
For factoring, how do we do that again?
What multiplies to give you negative 6, adds to give you negative 1.
Okay.
For quadratic function, you have to use the quadratic formula. Okay, when something's not factorable. So 2x squared plus 3x minus 1. You take the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And you reduce it down and do what you can. You get x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 plus 8 over 4. So x equals negative 3 plus or minus radical 17 over 4. Unless they specify, you can leave it in that form. Okay, so then we're going to practice a few from each. How would I solve this by factoring? What do you need to do?
Get it to equal 0?
Get it to equal 0 first. So you should have 6x squared minus 3x equals 0. How do I factor that?
Because like 3x.
Take a 3x out and do what? X minus 1.
Yeah, Mariah.
So then what can x equal?
What's score?
1 or something else.
Negative 1.
You set x minus 1 equal to 0 and x equals 1
Wait, how did you get 3x, x minus 1?
because you factor out a 3x. When I factor out a 3x, if I factor a 3x out of here, I have, oh no, it should be 2x, shouldn't it?
Oh,
2x minus 1. So then it should be x equals 1/2 or x equals 0. Because you have to set 3x equal to 0 as well and solve. So you have 2 possible solutions there when you factor that. Now, factor this one. We have to bring the 1 over, yes? 9x squared minus 6x plus 1 equals 0. What multiplies to give me 1 and adds to give me negative 6 with a leading coefficient of 9? This one's a special pattern. What is this here?
A perfect square.
What's this here? A perfect square. So it's a perfect square trinomial. What'd you say? 3x. And what?
Plus 1.
Not plus,
Minus 1.
because this is a negative here. A negative and a negative is a positive. Squared equals 0. Perfect square trinomial. Take the square root of both sides. 3x minus 1 equals 0. 3x equals 1. X equals 1/3. Factoring. You're going to have a lot of thinking to do tonight. Next, we have solve by extracting the square roots. What are we going to do to solve 4x squared equals 12? What do you do first? Divide by 4. And you get x squared equals 12, equals 3. Now what? Take the square root, and what do you get x equals? Plus or minus radical 3. and leave it like that, that's in simplest form. How about this one, x minus 3 squared equals 7, what do you do first? Yeah, take the square root of both sides. X minus 3 equals plus or minus radical 7, now what?
Add 3 to the other side.
Add 3 to the other side,
X equals 3 plus or minus 5, 7.
beautiful, that's where I'd leave it. You have to add 3 to the other side, so x gets by itself. What do you not get?
The whole thing?
Well, to get rid of a square, you have to take the square root.
Well, yeah.
So then that cancels this out to just give you that, and you have to do it on both sides. And there is no square root of 7, like a perfect square, so we just leave it. Okay, what do we do here?
Square root.
Square root again, and you get 2x minus 1 equals what?
3.
Nope,
3i.
plus or minus 3i, plus or minus 3i.
We still got eyes.
Now what do we do?
Add 1.
Add 1,
2x equals 3i plus 1.
2x equals 1 plus or minus
Yeah,
3i.
that.
Now what?
Divide by 2.
Divide by 2, and x equals,
1 plus or minus 3i over 2.
yep,
I'm a G.
I know, right?
okay? Now, from there, you have to do completing the square. Because, is this factorable, x squared plus 2x minus 6? No, you can't do anything to multiply to give you negative 6 and add to give you 2. Not possible. So how do I start to complete the square?
X squared plus 2x minus 6 over 2 squared equals 0.
No.
You add 6.
You add 6 to the other side, you've got to get it out of the way, so that you can complete the square. So you have x squared plus 2x plus something equals 6 plus something. Move it to the other side. Now, how do I figure out what that blank is?
You have to take half of the middle one.
Yeah, take half of the b. So 2 over 2 equals 1, and you square it, which gives me 1. So 1 goes there, 1 goes there. This I have to show in factored form. So x plus 1 squared equals 7. 6 plus 1 is 7. From there, you have to take the square root. Now you're to extracting the square root. And you get x plus 1 equals plus or minus radical 7. Yes? And then you would subtract 1 to the other side, and you get x equals negative 1 plus or minus radical 7. Completing the square. That's how you solve completing the square. Yes.
Wait, so, on the x plus 1, in the, inside the radical,
Yeah.
the squared, where, did the square come from the x squared on top?
The squared comes from, because we made this a perfect square trinomial. So if I factor it out, it's x plus 1 times x plus 1. That's where it came from. It's x plus 1 times x plus 1.
Okay.
Okay? Now, this one's a little trickier. This has a leading coefficient that is not 1, which means we have to get rid of that 2. How would you get rid of that 2?
Divide.
You would divide everything by 2. So this would change into x squared plus 4x plus something equals, and I'm gonna move that to the other side. What's 3 over 2? I'm gonna leave it as 3 over 2, there's a reason. Okay, 3 over 2 is just 1/2, right? 1 and 1/2. Okay, this is gonna be negative 3 seconds, because I move it over there, plus whatever. Now, how do we figure out what goes here and here? Divide 4 by 2 and you get, and square 2 and you get 4, 4. So this factors to x plus 2 squared equals, what's negative 3 seconds plus 4? Negative 3 seconds is 1.5, so what's negative 1.5 plus 4? 2.5. 2.5. So 2.5. Now what do you do from there? Take the square root. And you get x plus 2 equals plus or minus radical 2.5.
So why do you leave the 3 seconds as 3 seconds?
I would leave it as a fraction also inside the radical if I were you, because if the fraction is, here's why, let me show you. You're gonna need to leave this radical in fraction form, because what do you know about fractions and what do you know about radicals?
They don't drive.
Can you have a radical in a denominator spot?
No.
No. So when you have a radical that is a fraction like 2.5, you need to leave it in fraction form because you technically have a radical in the denominator spot at that time. So you need to do this in fraction form tonight, when it's like this. I don't want decimal answers, okay? So if I do, 4 would be 8 seconds, right? So you get 5 seconds, is that what you get? Mhm. So if I have it equal to the square root of 5/2, does 2 have a square root? No, how do you get 2 out of the denominator spot then, radical 2? Multiply it by radical 2. So the top becomes what instead of radical 5? Radical 10, so you get plus or minus radical 10/2. Now you subtract that 2, and you get x equals -2 plus or minus radical 10/2. That's how you want to write your answer. What, Jim?
Where'd you get the radical 10/2 from?
Because I take this radical 2, technically this breaks down into radical 5/radical 2, and that can't be in the bottom, so you have to multiply it by radical 2/radical 2. 5 and 2 is radical 10. Radical 2 times radical 2 is radical 4. What's the square root of 4?
2.
That's how we get that. Okay? And then the last one, we need to solve this by completing the square. So what do we have to do with 8? Subtract it. What's half of -4? -2. What's -2 squared? 4. So I get this, and I would have x minus 2 squared equals -4. This is gonna cause a problem. Okay, what do I do now?
Take the square root.
Take the square root. If I take the square root of both sides, I get x minus 2 equals what?
2.
How about plus or minus 2i? Plus or minus 2i? And then you get x equals 2 plus or minus 2i as your solution. So when you are solving these by completing the square, you can have whole number solutions, you can have radical solutions, you can have imaginary solutions on any of these. Except when we straight up factor, you won't have imaginary solutions, because that means everything works out perfect, okay? Now, last one, quadratic formula. What do I need to do to this in order to do quadratic formula? Get 9 to the other side. If I get 9 to the other side, then I can start to solve from there. So I'm going to have x squared plus 3x minus 9 equals 0. Quadratic formula is what?
Negative b plus or minus radical b squared minus 4ac over 2a.
Correct. Where is my A, B, and C?
A is 1, B is 3.
A is in front of this x, B is in front of the x squared, B is in front of x, and C is your constant. So I plug those in. Opposite of 3 is -3 plus or minus 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times -9 all over 2 times 1. Okay, so I get -3 plus or minus the square root of 9 plus, what's 4 times, -4 times -9? Positive 36. All over 2. What's 36 and 9 added together? 45, yeah. -3 plus or minus the square root of 45. Now, what does 45 break down into? 9 and 5, and 9 breaks down into? So you have -3 plus or minus 3 radical 5 over 2. And the book will probably give you an answer where it says -3 over 2 plus or minus 3 radical 5 over 2. It's gonna break it into 2 separate fractions. Because when you can break it into 2 separate fractions or reduce, you need to. Okay? And then one more quadratic formula, and then you can start stuff. Opposite of B is what on this one? 2. Plus or minus square root of -2 squared minus 4. My A is,
3,
and my C is all over 2. So I get 2 plus or minus the square root of 4. What's -4 times 3 times 5?
-60.
-60. All over 6. 2 plus or minus the square root of negative. I don't know why there's so much talking going on when we're still doing problems. Stop talking. 56, -56. What does that break down into?
8, 7.
8 and 7.
4 and 4.
4 and 2.
Up
2 and 2. So 2 radical 14. But that negative, I have to bring something else out. What represents the negative? What? I. So then your answer is 2 plus or minus 2I radical 14 over 6. What's 2 over 6 reduced down
How do you
to?
get 14?
Because you have to multiply this 2 and that 7 back together. 1/3. So you get 1/3 plus or minus I radical 14 over 3. This is the stuff you're working on today, and tomorrow we will also have more to work on. Because I'm sure it will take a while.